So thank you all for being here. Welcome to Commonwealth North's afternoon session on the energy on the edge and the future of Cook Inlet Gas. This is a topic that has bedeviled and inspired many people in this room for a long time. I see former Commissioner Huber here. I see Deputy Commissioner Crowther here. And then, of course, our esteemed panelists and many other people who have spent a long time paying attention to this issue. I have a couple of brief announcements before we turn to our speakers. So the first thing I wanted to mention is a big thank you to our sponsors. We have NSTAR, which is the Gold Changemaker sponsor. So thank you, NSTAR. And then Commonwealth North has two cornerstone sponsors, and they are ConocoPhillips and GCI. So thank you to both of them. So to kick us off, we are going to begin with, real fast before I go, two events I want to call out for you. So next week on Thursday afternoon, there's an event at the Port of Alaska on transportation and tariffs. We all know that the tariff landscape is changing pretty rapidly, and so this will be a great opportunity to learn about that firsthand. This is a member-exclusive event, but by virtue of attending here, you all get to be my guests at the event next week. So I will look forward to seeing you there. No jungle sounds will be provided. Additionally, I wanted to let you know about the 75th anniversary of the riverboat Discovery. Is that like close to approximately the truth as to what it's called? The Riverboat Discovery up in Fairbanks. And that is also a member exclusive event. I hope you will join me up in Fairbanks. It's going to be a great time. Probably will be hot, whereas in Anchorage it will not be. And thank you to Kai Binkley Sims for putting that together. Finally, and most importantly, in order to ask questions at the end of the presentations that will be given by our esteemed panelists, you need to text the telephone number that will appear on the screen, which is 877-907-5094. Please state your name and to whom you are directing the question, and then I will be the vessel through which those questions will be asked. Without further ado, we will begin with, is it Dr. Watson, I presume, of ICER, the university's ICER, and welcome on up, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
All right, so I think I'll move through my section of the presentation rather quickly to regain a little bit of time. But Ross had asked me to do a little bit of a scaffolding for our conversation today, to think about how I'm thinking, not just about the particulars of this conversation, but how I'm thinking about framing this conversation of energy in Alaska. So it kind of starts with three particular premises. The first premise is that Alaska is dependent on natural gas for a large portion of its energy, which shouldn't surprise anybody in this room, but I think it's important for all of us to acknowledge as a starting place here. Around half the homes in Alaska are heated with natural gas, 3/4 of homes in South Central. Alaska is also a key energy source for commercial and industrial users, and natural gas is the fuel source for a majority, 70% of our electricity generation. The second premise is that historically, our only supply of natural gas for Alaska, for domestic consumption, gas from the Cook Inlet Basin, is facing economic depletion. And I want to contrast this from physical depletion. So my training is as a resource economist, and resource economists often make the distinction between physical depletion, running out of stuff in the ground, and economic depletion, which is the point at which pulling another unit of that thing out of the ground is just more expensive than other things that we could be doing, particularly the price of that asset in global terms. And that's sort of the point that we are facing now. If you look at this figure on the right side, which was produced from a 2018 study by Department of Natural Resources on Cook Inlet gas availability, in order to secure volumes of gas to meet even a conservative demand scenario, that's that dotted black line here, will involve expenditures to be able to extract that gas that are higher than prices that we're historically used to paying. And in some cases, particularly in the out years, significantly higher prices. So it's not physical depletion that we face in the basin, but economic depletion. And the third premise that I think it's important for us to accept is that the consequences or the stakes of these two premises that I laid out at the beginning are not existential from the standpoint of our survival as Alaskans, but instead existential from an economic perspective. So once we accept the fact that Alaskans are not going to freeze to death, they will have the energy that they need in order to heat their homes, but that energy might come at costs that are significantly higher than those that we are used to experiencing, then we can reframe this conversation as being one about existential survival and one about raw economics. And we can think about this issue in terms of its economic implications. What are those economic implications? Well, I think most obviously are the direct economic impacts. We are going to see higher utility bills as a consequence of economic depletion in the Cook Inlet Basin. That's going to show up on our heating bills and our electricity bills. But I also think it's important to recognize that there's going to be higher indirect costs because of this. After all, most businesses use energy to produce goods and services, and so anything that we consume here in South Central Alaska that uses energy to produce it is going to get more expensive as those businesses either eat a portion of those increased energy costs or pass them on to their customers. So that's going to result in higher costs of living for folks in South Central Alaska. That might affect residential's location choices, right? We've had a conversation over the last decade or so about out-migration from the state. Higher costs of living are a contributing factor to out-migration. But it also might affect businesses' location choices, right? If businesses see higher costs of operation here relative to other opportunities in other places, they might choose to locate there instead. I always think it's important to note the energy prices kind of have a regressive quality to them, meaning that lower income households are disproportionately burdened by higher energy prices. And this is because the energy elasticity of demand with respect to income is inelastic, meaning that if your income doubles, you don't double your energy expenditures, meaning that the burden of higher energy prices disproportionately falls on lower income households. And I think it's also important to recognize that energy prices increasing in the Railbelt or South Central Alaska won't stay isolated to this region. They're going to have a propagating effect throughout the state. First, because the South Central Alaska serves as an important hub for people from rural Alaska that come in to purchase either goods or services, particularly healthcare, or people that are going on Costco runs. So those goods and services are going to get more expensive for those folks. But also more explicitly through policy, through our power cost equalization program. Higher prices in the Railbelt reduce this PCE subsidy and increase price or the out-of-cost expenditure for households in rural Alaska. So those are the stakes of this conversation. So like I said, I wanted to provide a little bit of scaffolding for our discussion today, and I wanted to do it through a metaphor that I've started to use when I talk to my friends about South Central energy issues. This is a really complicated problem. I feel like it's kind of hard for people to get their arms around sometimes. And so I've started to use this metaphor of hiking a trail in the Chugach and thinking about a fork that's coming up in that trail. It's a little ways off. We have a ways to walk yet along the trail. But in between us and the fork is a stream that we're going to have to cross, and we've got a little bit of trail to walk in between here and that stream. So what do I mean when I say we've got a little bit of trail to walk between here and that stream we've got to cross? Well, there's a few choices that utility companies are going to have to make, Arthur and John here, that are kind of basic blocking and tackling type choices, the type of choices that utility companies are routinely making as they seek to provide reliable service to their customers. And I think that it's important to call these types of choices out because I think that they help us frame up issues like the one that occurred last winter during the cold snap, and we had a potential interruption in utility services. I think that called out the vulnerability of some of our existing infrastructure, but I don't think that vulnerability was particular to the fact that we rely very heavily on natural gas from a depleting asset in the Cook Inlet Basin. What it really more speaks to is the fact that we have a single source of energy that we're very reliant on, and that some of that infrastructure that we use to access that asset are aging. And so these are the types of problems that can arise no matter where you source your energy from. And so there's just important choices to be made, like I said, in kind of the basic day-to-day management of these things to secure short-term stability in energy. So we're going to walk along this road for the next couple of years here until we get to that stream. What are we going to do when we need to cross that stream? Well, we could take a precarious path across this stream. Many of us have done this before when we're hiking. We try to skip across the mossy rocks and we might slip and fall. We might try to jump the stream or ford it in our extra tufts and get topsided. The safest thing to do when you're crossing a stream, though, is to look for a bridge. And if there's not a bridge there, then we might need to build one. So this will incur some time, some effort, and some energy in construction of this asset. And what we're going to be trying to do as we build out this bridge, which it'll take probably 2 to maybe even 10 years to cross, is try to make a significant enough investment that our energy security as we cross that stream is stable, but that once we get to the other side of that bridge, we don't regret the time that we spent building it. And so this is the question of preserving optionality while not investing too much in stranded assets that utility companies are going to be facing. And then finally, once we cross that bridge, we're going to come to a fork in the road. And we have two choices when we get to that fork. Either we're going to build a large energy transportation asset to liberate gas from the North Slope and bring it down here to South Central Alaska, which will allow us to export energy for decades into the future, or we're going to become a net energy importer. And those are really the two choices that we face. Either LNG tankers are going to be coming up the Cook Inlet loaded with gas, or they're going to be going out of the Cook Inlet loaded with gas. And that's just because of some simple math associated with the energy balance here in South Central. It's just really hard to make this math work without thinking about LNG exports in the long term or LNG imports in the long term. So I'm hoping we can come back to some of this math in the Q&A period. So I'll set up some questions for those if you want to seed them for me. We can talk about the math trying to count to 70 BCF, which is our total energy demand, or we can talk about the math trying to get to 25 BCF, maybe even an easier challenge, which is our electricity demand for gas right now. So I'll close out there, turn it over to John, and hopefully he can tell us some of the particulars about the situation in the Cook Inlet Basin right now.
So as we're setting up John's presentation, I'll just say, so John Hendricks is an Alaskan who went away, he made good, and he came back. He's now running Fury, and so he will do a presentation on whether he agrees with Dr. Watson as to the two choices for this.
I loved his economic depletion, but I didn't like his part about a net energy importer. With 19 T's of gas out there as a possibility, I'm always kind of optimistic with a can-do, take the can't out of the conversation. Let's build a hopper of opportunities and how we bid that and knock out all the paradigms that are out there that got us to where we are today. I'd like to first say that it's great to be here and it's great to have everybody around talking about this topic. A few of us have been involved in this for the last year or more. But in a way, we've kind of failed Alaskans and ourselves that we're at this point. We should not be having this conversation. There's gas there. We just have to develop the gas and have to do it. And we'll talk a little bit about, what is getting in the way. And that's why I liked about your part about the economic depletion. But economics will take care of itself. One thing I'm going to talk about real quick to keep in your mind is, remember, there's a cap on how much gas we can make. Once we make more than that, we can't sell it. It's a lock market. I can't compete with lower 48 gas, but damn it, if you bring up lower 48 gas, don't expect me to sell it to you cheaper because you screwed me, right? And that's just how it works. We're in here risking our capital to do our job as Alaskans. So there's a lot out there that Alaskans don't understand. Let me think, I hit that button right there. First, Alaskans do not know oil and gas. I've learned a lot in the last 5 years owning my own oil and gas company, a lot. And I never thought about these different things. I've been into every continent except Antarctica, drilling wells, fixing wells, repairing wells, doing production optimization, trying to get production up. But Cook Inlet's kind of unique. And Alaskans, Walker always said that, we have a silent industry. Cook Inlet makes it viable and makes it very visible to Alaskans outside of Prudhoe Bay. Here it becomes real, very real, because it's right here, it heats your homes. And we just don't understand oil and gas. I mean, oil and gas is comprised of upstream, midstream, and downstream. Utilities aren't oil and gas. They're a seller. They're not an upstream producer that explores and develops. I mean, Chugach's a kind of rarity there with Beluga, but they're not an operator like we are. We're actually operating an oil and gas field. So there's a differentiation. And with that knowledge, we need to understand and align the drivers of each one of us to help Alaskans develop the resources we have as a state. DNR's here, their job in life is to basically maximize the value of our resources to Alaskans. Bringing in gas from the lower 48 is, to me, a slap in the face to Alaskans that we're having to do this. But we're kind of like pushing ourselves in that direction. Since Alaskans really don't know much about oil and gas, sadly, it's a billion-dollar industry, but we really don't know it. And we're learning. I'm learning every day, and I've had over 50 years in this industry. But we need to work out and continue to work and strive to make sure we understand what makes utilities tick, what makes us tick as an oil and gas provider. We must understand the difference between those that are risking capital and those which can go to the RCA and get it approved, and then they can move forward on projects. We try to minimize the cost of projects. Public utilities, they get RCA approval and they move them forward. But we have to understand there's some good and bad in all that. We need to basically have a hopper of opportunities for the state of Alaska. Who is the keeper of the hopper of our energy source? Heck, the AEA, Alaska Energy Authority, isn't even over oil and gas. They have nothing to do with gas. DNR does. DNR and AOGCC govern me, and the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, and AEA work with utilities. How do we get these guys to work together for the betterment of Alaskans as we move forward? These are big dollars. One thing I was going to tell you too, for every $1 increase, because we hear Juneau talking all the time, why are we trying to help oil and gas? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? For every $1 increase of gas rate costs Alaskans in this region that use our gas about $100 million. And that's just going to go up. So when you start thinking about just simple numbers to apply. So I talked about the ceiling, 70 Bs per year, and I was welcoming all the utilities and all the renewables that were out there the last 3 years that were taking up a lot of our space, us that were actually putting our money on the line and our risk at the line and our family savings accounts on the line to come forward and knock into that 70B. I didn't see much. Of that 70 Bs of gas, how much is coming from renewables? How much will come from renewables? That's something as an investor you have to look at, right? Because if I'm going to spend money drilling wells and these threats out there of North Slope gas pipeline coming down, LNG imports coming down, renewables replacing natural gas, well, how much is there for us in the future? If you want to transition to the North Slope gas pipeline in the future, how am I going to bridge that? Back to your bridge, I look at a bridge differently. How do I bridge to a North Slope gas? Do we just go out, or is that why we're pushing LNG imports? Is so to take the place of the North Slope gas pipeline to come down to take the place, because they know we're not going to spend a lot of money if you're going to replace this in 3 years. False mindset of scarce, expensive Cook Inlet gas and the need to import LNG. There's gas there. It's just the economics have to work. And I mean, just the title of this thing just shows that we've given up on gas to some. Say we're living on the edge. We shouldn't be living on the edge. We should be thriving in gas. Why is that? Think of yourself, and I'll be talking about that in a second. I'm jumping ahead. If we had the opportunities that renewables and even utilities had, that we could go to an RCA and we can get funding to wrap everything up for us and pay us back and guarantee that every dollar I spent, I made it back and I made a rate of return, they'd be spending money like crazy. Confusion under the understanding of production capability versus contracted volumes versus guaranteed long-term contracts. When you run an oil and gas company, you know what you could produce. You know what the other opportunities are out there. You know what your hopper of opportunities are, and you go after them over time. We don't possess that in Cook Inlet. We need to have that. So something right now in Cook Inlet is we have a demand, we have production, and we have long-term contracts. Utilities want long-term contracts. We got production. They want long-term contracts. We've been talking about this and how do we match these together. the same thing. I have to have a little bit more production than demand and a little bit more than long-term contracts to survive. Funding is not an issue if the economics are improved, like I said, and if oil and gas had the opportunities everybody else had. I pay property tax. I'm not really proud that I'm the 5th largest property tax payer in Cook Inlet, or in Kenai Peninsula. I shouldn't be. If I was a utility, an electric utility, I wouldn't be paying property tax. I wouldn't be paying, if I was renewables, I wouldn't be paying property tax. Why does oil and gas pay 12.5% royalties? Mining pays 2%, fishing pays none, timber, we ran them out of business. Why does oil and gas pay 12.5% royalties? Especially when you need our product. And understand the role of the Regulatory Commission of Alaska and AEA. Understanding what they do. They don't help me. They approve contracts, but mostly those for the utilities. And there's a difference between a gas utility and an electric utility. Everybody has their different things. And I don't claim to know everything and all the legalities around electric utilities, even though I worked for HEA when I was in high school. Here's something I always like to do in compliment to Instar and the misnomer that Alaskan gas is expensive. This is a federally funded, federally backed, that this is the rate you pay at your meter in the Anchorage area. It's the 4th cheapest gas in the country at your meter. We might charge more for gas, but it's the 4th cheaper than Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now I'd like to introduce Arthur Miller, not the playwright, the CEO of Chugach Electric Association. Arthur's been at Chugach for 35 years, which is as long as I've been alive, and is here to talk about Chugach's interpretation of the bridge.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon. First of all, I do want to I will run through, I've got about 14 slides. I'll go through these very, very quickly. I'll give a quick background about Chugach and some of the issues really front and center to us as an organization. First, I do want to mention, I think it's important to bring this up because the electric power industry is a different industry today than it was 20 years ago. We are being significantly impacted by really 3 primary factors: decentralization of the power grid, a lot more distributed generation, heightened awareness of decarbonization, and that's both on the supply side, the generation side of the business, as well as the customer side. We're seeing significant advancements in technology associated with those, and that's the third element of change is technology. As we move forward, we are constantly looking at different technologies to adopt into our generation stream. At the same token, we have to balance our generation requirements with, we have over $600 million invested in gas generation power plants. But on top of that, we have other renewable options growing all the time, every day, as efficiencies become more paramount. One thing is important, the Chugach Board of Directors established decarbonization goals, no more than 35%, I mean, a minimum, at least 35% by 2030 and at least 50% by 2040 with 2 important caveats. One, no significant negative material impact on electric rates, or number 2, or reliability. Those elements are critical as we move forward. But we, as an electric utility, have options. We've heard about gas from the North Slope. We certainly support that. There's gas imported LNG, but with renewables, we can also look at other options to meet our generation requirements. This slide just is a high-level summary of our service area. We serve both urban and rural areas. We're the largest electric utility in the state of Alaska. We have 6 primary generation locations, over 900 megawatts of installed capacity. And as was mentioned, we do own a 2/3 working interest in the Beluga River gas field, of which our Beluga power plant sits on top of that field. That's also will be the terminus for the GRIP funding on the transmission line from Soldotna and Nikiski if that project hopefully continues to move forward. Our current generation mix, we're about 80% in round numbers, natural gas, 20% renewable generation, predominantly hydro. Out of our gas requirements, however, 60% are met through our working interest in the Beluga River Unit gas field. 40% are met from our long-term contract with Hilcorp, which expires at the end of March of 2028. Importantly, as we all know, Hilcorp announced in 2022 they will no longer be extending contracts to the utilities under the existing terms and conditions. That means we don't have assurance of a gas supply on the 40% that we're getting today from our Hilcorp contract after the expiration of that agreement. Importantly, no producer or supplier in Cook Inlet has come to Chugach and said, we can meet your requirements on April 1 of 2028. For Chugach, this is not a question of do we want to import LNG or do we want gas, in-state gas from Cook Inlet or the North Slope. Our fundamental question is we need gas in beginning April of 2028, really earlier than that, to make sure that we have reliable electric service. Ideally, we support continued development in the Cook Inlet Basin. Absolutely, we support a gas pipeline from the North Slope, but we also support making sure that we have a reliable source of gas at the expiration of our contract in 2028. We are uniquely positioned as an electric utility. As I mentioned, we are a 2/3 working interest owner in the Beluga River Unit gas field. We've also been planning for the expiration of our contract with Hilcorp. We entered into an underlift agreement with Hilcorp late last year, earlier this year, where when we are in situations where production exceeds our current needs, we can underlift that gas, and then Hilcorp will give us the majority of that gas back beginning in 2028 over a 4-year period. Importantly, we just recently entered into an agreement with Marathon Petroleum Company to exchange gas, well, 1.0 BCF per year between now and first quarter of 2028. And we'll get that gas back beginning over a 3-year period after beginning April 1 of 2028. On top of this, we do have a storage contract with Mr. Sims, Singza, about 2 BCF. Our annual requirements of gas are about 13 BCF. We need more gas storage. I think that was alluded to earlier about the vulnerabilities that we encountered in the Cook Inlet Basin a year ago with deliverability issues on gas storage. Well, we're becoming at a different place today because of Hilcorp offering, they submitted a CPCN earlier this year to offer gas storage service. We do need additional storage capabilities in the Cook Inlet Basin. In addition to that, Chugach and Matanuska Electric Association also purchased a battery energy storage system that's located at our headquarters building, just south of our headquarters complex. We own 75% of the battery, or about 30 megawatts. MEA has about 25% and 10 megawatts. That battery increases reliability, but also it saves fuel cost. We can operate our system in a more efficient manner. We also have backup generation from our diesel power plant downtown, in downtown Anchorage. And then we also are power pooling with Matanuska Electric Association. And in general, we save about $3 million a year because of greater efficiencies through economic dispatch. Graphically, this picture really summarizes our gas supply situation. The orange area represents our long-term contract with Hilcorp that expires at the end of first quarter of 2028. The green area represents our 2/3 working interest in the Beluga River Unit gas field. Right now, it's expected that the economic life of that field will run through 2033. We are currently evaluating and doing a reserve study analysis at that field, and we expect that the life of that field will increase. The blue area represents our exchange agreement with Marathon, and the purple area represents our underlift agreement with Hilcorp. But the key is, how do we fill that gap? Imported LNG we're looking at is a temporary solution or a bridge solution to longer-term solutions. That is, gas from the North Slope, or additional gas developments in the Cook Inlet Basin, or additional renewable generation. Earlier this year, in January, Chugach, Harvest Alaska, and Marathon announced that we were working together in support of Harvest's efforts to own and operate the terminal infrastructure down in the Kiski. And importantly, their timeline meets Chugach's timeline for natural gas. And with that, we can meet our requirements for both on the renewable energy side, as well as additional gas from gas that's being imported through the LNG markets. The rate impact, we talked about this a little bit earlier. For Chugach customers, because natural gas makes up about 25% of your total bill, out of that, about 11% is gas that we're getting from under a long-term contract with Hilcorp. When we replace that with LNG, we're looking at about a 10% increase to electric bills. I say 10%, that's a conservatively high estimate. With the exchange agreements and the underlift agreement that we have, that will reduce that. But on top of that, we know we need additional gas storage. In addition to Singza and Hilcorp offering storage, we also are looking at storage possibilities at the Beluga River Unit gas field. In summary, we're taking a multifaceted approach to managing our generation requirements. In addition to importing LNG, we're continuing to invest a lot of dollars into the Beluga River Unit gas field. We've drilled 15 wells in the last 4 years. We expect another 5 wells this year. We're aggressively pursuing partnering up with other entities like we've had with Marathon and Hilcorp. We certainly are looking at renewable generation options with those caveats that I mentioned earlier. We absolutely support economic dispatch, and we also support partnering up with other utilities and for the benefit of our collective membership. And I think it's also important to say that with the sophistication that's available now in technology, a more robust rate design process that allows us to really maximize the utilization of assets through appropriate pricing mechanisms. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arthur.
I do. Let's go to the DNR website.
Okay,
I'm going off script.
John's going off script, as usual. So 2 quick things. One, from a timing perspective, because we did have that delay in the beginning, we will go until latest 5:30. I just want you to be able to plan your subsequent plans. And then also I wanted to remind everyone of the telephone number. If you have any questions, please text that in. This is maybe not once in a lifetime, but a great opportunity to ask folks questions that you have on your mind. Thanks, John.
Let's see if I can get here. Start my time. I know. Let's see. This might not be it. I wanted to show the map of the leases. This is it. This is exactly what's it. So I wanted to chat a little bit, and I'm, like I said, I'm going off script here. But I wanted to try and frame the challenge a little differently. So NSTAR and Fury just entered into a contract that was recently approved by the commission. And in that contract, some great things were done by DNR that allowed for those royalties to be reduced. So that reduces the cost for gas for our customers. But what's your market share if you're successful this summer? What's the increase? 11% market share for Cook Inlet Gas. So that means we have to find a replacement for the rest of that 11%, right? And so looking at the lease map here, everything that's in purple is Hilcorp. This blue down here, that used to be Vision, that's now also Hilcorp. You've got the green, which is Blue Crest, the Cosmopolitan unit, which has historically been known to have some quantities of gas, but at this point, I'm not aware of any activity that's going on down there. And then you've got Fury. So we've got the majority leaseholder in the Cook Inlet that has very publicly said they're not interested in extending natural gas contracts. You've got Fury, who's doing an amazing job, investing a ton of capital, working as hard as they can to fix the problem. And if they're successful, they're 11%. Then we get to the remainder for the utility. And that's really the challenge that we're talking about here, is when you talk about the producers out there, there is enormous risk. And we've seen this time and time again, right? In history, we've had a number of producers that have tried to enter into this market, and they've been unsuccessful and they've gone bankrupt. And what I really appreciate about John is I've been pushing him hard like we used to push the other producers. And John said, I don't know what I have until I drill. And so he's not going to enter in and make commitments that he's not sure that he can deliver on. In the past, some of those producers made commitments that they could not deliver on, and they went bankrupt. And so that's the challenge that we have here as a state, is utilities have to have gas. They have to know where it's coming from. And producers have to have reserves, and they have to know that they can deliver on the commitments that they make. But we're running into this just-in-time inventory situation that is really, really challenging for both the utilities and for the producers. So when you look at commercially, how do you structure this? We're doing the best we can, but the bottom line, if John is as successful as he thinks he can be, that's 11% market share. And we have to find a replacement for all the rest. And so that's our issue. That's why when Arthur and I, for this year. So, yeah, but I think everyone gets the point, right? Is we need John to be successful. We need Alaskan companies to be successful, and we want them to be successful. I've got first right of refusal on any molecule that he produces out of there, and I'm going to buy it. And that's not going to fix the problem. So what do we do in the future for our customers? We have to have reliable gas coming in. I'll take another risk. A lot of people know each other here in this room. Who thinks a pipeline's coming down from the North Slope? I'm going to raise my hand too, right? Yeah. Okay, so there's, what, 5 people? For those who can't see, I was one of them, for the record. When is a huge question. When is a huge question. And then what challenges does it run into? Okay, so that's the other thing that the utilities have to deal with. There are things that we cannot bank on. We believe in them, but we cannot bank on them. And that's a huge difference when you think about how we operate as a business. So I'm just going to tee that up. I had a lot of other things on my slide to talk about, but I'll try and catch us up just to think about. That is the challenge that we're dealing with today, is there's not a utility in the state that doesn't want to utilize Alaska resources, that has done everything they can to try and maximize Alaskan resources. And if that's not the case, let me know what else I can do and we'll do it. But we need to be supportive of our Alaskan producers, all of them, to be successful. And we also need to understand the challenges that the utilities have in recognizing that there has to be gas, because we're trying to serve all of you. And that's the conundrum that we have. And from a business perspective, it's been really difficult for decades to solve.
Luckily, the solution man is here. Director Nottingham of the State of Alaska Department of Natural Resources will talk to us about DNR's perspective on this pernicious problem. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Derek Nottingham, Director of the Division of Oil and Gas, and yeah, the challenges in the Cook Inlet, as we've all heard, are very, very real, and they don't seem to get any easier as the days go by. So appreciate all of the previous presenters, and it's hard following up after all these guys, but I will try to do my best here. So what I'm going to show you guys is just a snapshot of where we stand in terms of production in the Cook Inlet, and what we see is maybe some of the potential development in the Cook Inlet and how that might bridge the gap, as well as just some of the ongoing activity that is still out there. I know we kind of think of it as a depleting, dying asset, but there's still quite a lot of drilling activity going on at Fury's platform, as well as on the Hillcorp side. So kick into that. So this is a bit of the the production history, I won't dwell on this too much, but back in the heyday of the Cook Inlet, over 300 BCF per year. I think that was on the order of 850 million cubic feet a day, or just somewhat less than a BCF a day. At that time, LNG exports, agrium exports, those industries kind of went away in the 2000s, mid-20 teens. And you can kind of see where we are right now at about 70, 75 BCF per year of production out of the Cook Inlet. And one of the big things to notice from this is like a lot of the fields that were big producers then, back in the heyday of the Cook Inlet, are still the bigger producing fields in the Cook Inlet today, with a few exceptions. The Kitchen Lights unit is one. Nanilchik is one that kind of came on and is seeing sort of its climax and heyday in the 2000 era. But for the most part, what that says is very depleted, very mature assets that we're relying on our natural gas supply out of the Cook Inlet. So back in 2022, when Hillcorp said that they weren't going to extend contracts under the existing terms, DNR, we do what we do. We put together a study. We forecasted supply out of the Cook Inlet, and we've been kind of updating this study since that time. And so you can find that on our website. But what this study, revealed is, yes, that we are seeing future supply shortages in the Cook Inlet in the next, within the decade. So this is a graph that we've shown countless times over the last couple of years. We are continuously modifying this and continuously updating it. So this is probably the latest and greatest version of it. And one of the things that you'll see here is on the very far left side is 2024's production in red, which was 72 BCF. We forecasted 73 BCF. And if you'll notice, we pulled 4 BCF net out of storage last year to meet the consumption. So we're actually running a little hot relative to the 70 BCF per year. Variety of reasons why that might be. We're not let's say probably the best source for what the demand is, right? Like a lot of folks in this room are probably the best compilers of what the actual usage is out of the Cook Inlet. We came up with this estimate of 70 BCF back in 2022 when from EIA data that indicated usage in the Cook Inlet was kind of coming down, so we assumed it flat at around that 70 BCF per year, but it actually looks over the last 2 or 3 years to be running fairly hot. The other thing that you'll notice from this is there's 70 BCF of demand, 75 BCF of demand. Around 10 BCF of that is fuel usage out in the existing oil and gas fields for a variety of operations, power generation, compression, using the natural gas for that. So there's the ongoing operations and the utility demand that kind of comprise of that 70 BCF. So what is the outlook that we have? John kind of mentioned, is there a hopper? Yeah, I mean, we have a good idea of some of the known gas pools in the Cook Inlet that haven't been developed as extensively. The Kitchen Lights unit is one that John's actively drilling right now in. Mr. Sims mentioned earlier the Cosmopolitan unit has a known gas accumulation that's we know to be fairly significant, that Blue Crest is the operator of. If you were to put those online and produce them at the rates that they need to in order to accomplish their economic objectives, what you would see added on top of the previous graph is those orange bars that you see there. So is there enough even just known developable gas in the Cook Inlet? Yeah, I mean, that's without doing a whole lot of additional exploration. It's there. It really is a question of the economics and getting the contracts in place to make it happen. And John mentioned earlier that when you're spending tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars on these kind of projects, you need to bring them on at a high enough rate. You can't just bring on enough rate to fit the remainder or the incremental demand for the Cook Inlet. You really need to be able to push that gas out of your wells and get return on that investment pretty quick. Otherwise, they don't pay out. So what this represents is the possibility of bringing on that gas at a high enough rate, but then storing it and then pulling it out of storage at a later date. So that's what those purple bars represent there. Just a few more slides. This slide really just shows the production by field and where it's kind of distributed. As I mentioned, a lot of the gas that we're producing in the Cook Inlet now is coming from the fields that we've produced from in the past. And then last year, just a quick overview of the activity in the Cook Inlet. Quite a bit of development drilling, 19 development wells, two gas storage wells at Singsa, and 2 exploratory wells. So there's still a very active drilling program going on in the Cook Inlet for as mature a basin as it is.
Great. So my first question will be for you, Director Nottingham. 2 questions. First, what is DNR doing to change this, right, to make things better? And my second is, of the 19, I guess it was 21 wells that were drilled this last year, what was the average production rate out of each of those wells, and how does that compare to 20 years ago?
Yeah, so I'll start with the first question. I mean, I think one is making sure that our existing operators, producers are developing their leases. From Hillcorp being the dominant operator in the Cook Inlet, they are generally, by and large, on task for developing the gas that exists in their leases. For example, like some of the more mature fields that they produce out of, we're seeing them actually starting to get, at least based on our estimates, recovery factors. So how much gas you produce relative to the amount of original gas in place in the 80s, maybe even in the 90% range for a whole field. I mean, and they continue to do activity in those fields. And then the other is, ensuring that, the development at Kitchen Lights moves forward. As John mentioned, we did approve a royalty modification for them in this past year. And so we're actively trying to make sure that the operators, producers have the tools they need, that we're responsive to them in terms of making sure that we're doing the things that we have in our authority to help them move forward. And, as far as the initial rates on wells, I would say that they're probably like in the 2 to 5 million a day range, which, you go back 20 years or so, you're probably seeing, in just ballpark estimates, 5 to 10 to 15 million a day range. I mean, occasionally you'll get a well that pops at 10 or 15 million a day, and that's great, but those are probably the exception, not the rule today.
Okay, thank you so much. Quick reminder for those in the room, we would prefer that you text questions, although if we run out of questions, I'm coming to you.
Mark, can I just add
Yeah,
on to that
please.
real quick? Because there's an important concept, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So the daily delivery from a well, why that's important is for NSTAR on our peak day, we need about 300 million. So when you think about what each well is bringing on a daily rate, 5 out of the 300, that's every little bit matters. So that's an important distinction there, what we actually need.
Yeah, thank you. My next question is for Dr. Watson, and I wanted to take a second to frame this up. When we talk about cost of living, a friend of mine went to Sagaya yesterday and bought Parmesan cheese for $22.46. So we all know, first of all, she should not be shopping at Sagaya. No offense, Sagaya. But also that things are, costly these days. And so I thought about that in the context of natural gas, and I looked back in 1993 when I graduated from high school. The gas cost for NSTAR was, I think, 83 cents. Today, it's something closer to 10?
We just filed for another gas cost adjustment increase, so it's $10.11.
$10.11. I can't do math, but that's a big increase, right? So my question for you, Dr. Watson, is especially using Mr. Hendricks's rubric of each $1 per MCF increase equates to 100 million for our economy. Can you talk about the effect both on the residents of South Central? You talked about the effect on the state, but also just on outmigration and the economy. Is there any additional color you want to add in light of that?
Sure. No, I think that, over the last couple of years, we haven't experienced a inflationary bout like the one that we just went through since the 70s. And so people are particularly attentive to cost of living considerations. So ICER, we just completed a survey of about 4,500 people that live in the lower 48 now. And we asked them what all their barriers to thinking about moving to Alaska would be. And consistently cited was cost of living. And so it was pretty clear that this cost of living increase that everyone in the country had experienced become more salient in people's minds in framing some of their interstate migratory choices. And so I think that it is important. It is an important issue to pay attention to. I don't know exactly where the rule of thumb dollar 100 million increment came from. I think I'll accept that. That sounds fairly reasonable to me. Arthur mentioned that projected cost increases would lead to about a 10% increase in utility bills. As I mentioned, that's going to be probably for the median customer, however, and that would have disproportionate increases on lower income households because of the proportion of their income that they spend on their utility bills. So I think it's material. And like I noted, it's not just the direct energy expenditures, it's all these pass-through costs, like your friend's very expensive cheese from New Sagaya, although I appreciate their lunch buffet.
Thank you. And this one's for Arthur and John, who I get to call by their first names because I know them very well. You both have signed commercial agreements. Your companies have both signed commercial agreements for what would be the bridge, right? What would purport to be the bridge. My question is, why is yours better than the other person's? And how does yours support a long-term transition to something other than natural gas for electric generation?
Very good question. So let me first say, so we have not signed any formal agreements yet. Okay. We're waiting. The FEED study is expected to be done by mid-2025. And so that's still under evaluation. Number two, would you ask a question about which project is better, if I understand what the, I guess the basis of the question is? Well, you have to look at it from this perspective. What other project meets Chugach's needs by first quarter of 2028? The other project is not able to import LNG gas by that timeline. We don't look at those as competing projects in that context. This is the project that meets Chugach's needs for our members, and that's why we are pursuing this project. I will also say, there is a certain level of capital investment that is required to make these projects move forward. Whether that's recovered over a 10-year period, a 5-year period, or a 30-year period, these entities that are making these investments, they are going to require to get back their capital investment. So we are cognizant of that, and we'll work to structure an agreement that would be as flexible as possible to allow us to be more dynamic as we look out into the future to incorporate alternative generation technologies into our generation portfolio.
So just real quick follow-up, you don't view your two solutions as mutually exclusive? And I'm not trying to pin you guys down, I just want to understand how Chugach is looking at it.
How Chugach is looking at it, and I think you're looking at the Glenfarne import LNG project, that does not meet our timeline.
Sure.
So our contract for 40% of our gas requirements ends at the end of first quarter of 2028. That's what we're going.
Yeah.
If you were to come back and say, well, the other project, the Glenfarne project can meet our deliverability requirements. And really, when I say first quarter 2028, really, we need gas brought into the Cook Inlet in 2027 with adequate storage so that we're prepared to go. We can't wait till the last minute for that crossover.
Because of
But
the reliability consideration you
the
mentioned earlier.
reliability,
Yeah.
and really, reliability is key. That's non-negotiable. And we will not compromise, we will not compromise reliability under any circumstances. We need 100% assurance that we're going to have gas to meet our generation requirements.
Okay, thank you. John?
Okay. You just turned that one off.
We good?
Yep.
There we go. All right. So as far as commercial agreements for an import project, so we have not executed any commercial agreements to bring in LNG import. We signed an exclusivity agreement to work specifically with Glenfarne for a certain time period as we continue down that project. The only commercial agreement that I've got in place for future gas sales are with Hilcorp and with John for gas out of Cook Inlet. We still have those challenges that I mentioned earlier, though, on where do we get the rest of the gas coming from. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. Our NSTAR's issue as far as timing is different from the electric utilities. So our contract expires with Hilcorp in 2033 as opposed to 2028. So if you're just looking at NSTAR's needs, we have a little different timeline. However, the utilities have been looking at this collaboratively, recognizing that there are cost efficiencies if we can do something together. As Arthur mentioned, though, different timelines present some challenges. So that's the status of that.
And how does your exclusivity agreement with Glenfarne lend itself to proposed diversification of electric generation in the future?
That's a question for Arthur. I don't know how I would answer that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so for DNR and Mr. Hendricks, is there anything that the state of Alaska can do to de-risk independent producers and provide their financiers comfort so they could invest for 10 to 20 years in Cook Inlet natural gas?
Well, I think, DNR did us a good service and DOG this year about looking at what it takes for us to be a viable company and to bring on new gas. And I think they need to look at that. I think all Cook Inlet needs to look at it. I think as Alaska, like I brought AEA up earlier, as a producer, an Alaskan, and a citizen of America that gives our state money, I want to make sure money that comes in is used wisely. I used to work for HEA, and now you got Bradley Lake Diversion out of Dixon Glacier coming in. It's a $350 million project. At 10% a year, that's $35 million that Americans are giving to us. And then I heard that $350 million project that raises the dam up 15 feet generates 1.4 Bs of gas a year. You guys know what 1.4 Bs is? People with our units and numbers, we get all confused with all this, but I drilled a sidetrack well last year for $12 million. It's contributing 1.5 Bs a year for $12 million. And then you're going to sling $350 million down there. Do you know what $350 million would do for my company in Cook Inlet? And you can or just give me the interest on the money, right? $35 million a year. I could drill 2 new wells every year. That's pretty renewable right there. But I think, again, it takes more just than DNR. I think we need a unified approach. Just like I said, utilities coming together with producers in the state working on it. So, AEA is not working on solar panels and Puppy Dog Lake and Kenai and wind farms and stuff, but build a hopper of energy. Oil and gas should be included in energy, and find out what's best for the state and activate it. But
Okay.
okay.
Director Nottingham, again, the question was, is there anything the state of Alaska can do to de-risk independent producers so they would have comfort and their financiers would have comfort to invest over a 10 to 20 year horizon in Cook Inlet?
Yeah, I think, John mentioned that the royalty modification is one way to do that, because that basically takes some of the costs out of the system. Costs to an investor is risk in essence. So that is one possibility. The other things that makes me think of is, when it comes to the small independent producers, there's safety in the number of wells that you can produce. And so the more wells that you can drill and put online, the better. And so by taking costs out of the system, whether it's our costs or some other imposed costs from the state or just outside industry in general, that allows the producers to afford better equipment to put in their wells to produce them at higher rates and make them more reliable. So there's that aspect of it too, that if you can drill less wells at higher rate, you can improve your economics, better to invest, those kind of things, and they're more reliable to the utilities who need that gas.
So please.
So we're drilling 2 wells this year, right? We just TD'd the 1 well and submitting it to the production liner today. But we're not doing it the best way we could, okay? Because I have limited scope to do it. If I had more time with rigs and stuff like that, I could complete this well. Instead of it doing our project, we're thinking 3 million a day. We're not completing it with a frac pack or sand control or anything. We're going to control it with the choke, and hopefully sand won't come in, but we've made provisions with the clean up coil we can. But if we had 2 more weeks and another $10 million per well, we could let that rip and roar and probably get it up to maybe 8 million a day per well. So that's how we determine it. But I need the well count, like the director said, because I want diversity in my portfolio to minimize my risk. We are looking at another play in the Cook Inlet on land next year, and hopefully that would help. But that's an exploration play.
And on that point, Mr. Hendricks, while you have the mic, what amount of the 70 BCF or 73.45 BCF of annual demand could HEX eventually meet?
Well, we're around 4 right now, and we hope to be about 6 to 7 Bs by the end of this year on that kind of rate. And then every year, each one of our wells, we're putting economics around 12 to 18 Bs per well. So, all right.
Many folks referenced the bridge period we are in. If we're not bridging toward a gas line, and I'm hoping Director Nottingham is going to have breaking news to tell us that we are, but if we're not bridging toward a gas line, what are we bridging toward?
So I'll take that one to start. So we believe we are bridging towards a gas line. That's one of the reasons why we partnered with Glenfarne, and this project specifically brings the development of an import facility that hopefully will turn into an export facility once that project is up and rolling. And so that's, we've had this long desire to maintain our reliance on Alaskan energy, and this was the way that we saw that could happen. Even though there's a temporary bridge there where we think there could be need for imports. That's the plan. That was in my slides that I skipped, but I think they're going to hand them out to everybody. The opportunity to develop that import facility that can be turned around for export at the same project site. And if it doesn't happen, then hopefully we'll continue to buy from John and anyone else that develops in the inlet and have that backup of import if it's needed.
Using your 2033 date, beyond that date, what's your range of bridge time that you might expect with the pipeline fully bridged?
And John, could you please repeat the question for those online?
Yeah, so the question was, with our date of 2033, what are we bridging to?
Yeah, how long would it take to meet in your estimates when you have to use the import bridge to get to the pipeline?
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little complicated because, I've sort of been the face for the utilities in the communications. And so we've been speaking as a collaborative group. And so we believe that we can have that import facility in place by 2029. Now, obviously, that doesn't meet Chugach Electric's needs. And then the pipelines coming in after that, which I believe, there have been a different, number of different dates out there. But
Are you looking at a range of, say, 38 to 48?
Well, we think that the pipeline could be done before then. Yeah.
Arthur.
Just to add on to what Mr. Sims said, from Chugach's perspective, we certainly support additional development in the Cook Inlet Basin. We absolutely support a gas line from the North Slope. But we also recognize that as an electric utility, our options that are available for us really continue to increase all the time as technology changes. And renewable generation gets cheaper and cheaper all the time. And those are the technologies we want to adopt into our generation portfolio. I don't see a future, however, without some level of reliance on natural gas. We do have over $600 million in gas generation. We are not walking away from that. We have the most efficient generation in the state of Alaska on gas-fired units. But from a longer-term perspective, being 80% reliant on natural gas, from my perspective, is not, we need greater diversification as a utility. And we get that diversification through renewable generation.
Okay, one final question from the audience. Oh, one final interjection
As
from
someone that
Mr.
was involved
Hendricks.
internationally with the gas pipeline, it was like a $56 billion project before with Exxon. We knocked it down to $48 billion back before pandemic, back in 2000. When was that, 17? And now it's a $44 billion project. As an Alaskan, I hope we don't have someone that's smarter in the room and that uses this number against us like a used car salesman out there selling a project for 44 billion. It ends up being 80 billion or 60 billion, and our market share of our pipeline is diminished greatly. I believe it's going to happen, but we got to be very smart going down this path, because I don't think anybody over at AGDC has ever had a project over $20 million in their portfolio before that is currently an employee.
Thank you for that. Former Representative Groh, go ahead with your question. I'll repeat it for the audience online.
My question is for Greg Watson. It's two parts. One is when you solicited, one is when you got. The one you solicited was, I'd like you to talk more about, hey, your importer or export, and why you say that. The second thing I'd like you to address is, what is the most surprising thing that has happened in the last 2 hours that you would go back in time and tell the Greg Watson 3-3?
So the two questions were, first, why is it importer versus exporter, and why are they mutually exclusive, is what I think I heard. And second, what have you learned in the last 2 hours that you would go back and tell your former self? And this was to Dr. Watson, who will wrap it up for us. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the question. So the first point about just the arithmetic of counting to 70 BCF of gas demand is that without hitting that number sort of on the mark, right? If you overshoot it, you're in export world. And if you overshoot it significantly, then you're in LNG export world, right? If you overshoot it a little bit, I suppose you're in storage world. But if you undershoot it at all, then you're in import world. And as you think about the declining rates of production from the basin, I think it's just more and more likely that it's going to be very difficult to specifically target that 70 BCF number. And so, I suppose we could go back to reference the slide, but I'll spare you the math there. That I just think that the arithmetic's difficult, right? Even if you gave, even if Arthur and Chugach were very successful in their diversification goals, that gets you 25 BCF, right, across the electricity generators. Even if we electrified all the homes in South Central Alaska and moved away from gas demand for home heating, that's about 20 BCF of gas. Well, you still have 30 or 40 BCF of gas that you got to go find from somewhere. And that either means importing it from international and other national markets or from the slope. And so if we're pulling it down from the slope, we're in export world. So that's why I think it's a binary choice there. As to your question about what I learned in the last hour or so that I would go back and tell myself. I think that my earlier remarks, I'd set this up as a kind of a three-step process. We've got the immediate path to walk, we've got the bridge, and we've got the fork. I think the fork is more complicated than, than I had conceived of walking into this. The bridge, I think that we know what we need to do, or we know what we need to build. I think Arthur and John laid it out pretty clearly, what they have envisioned for what that facility looks like. And I think the path that lays before us immediately is also pretty clear. So in some ways, that's a little bit comforting, because I think we know what the immediate next steps are for us in the next 5 to 10 years. And that should buy us some time to figure out the more complicated and more forward-looking issue. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. On behalf of Commonwealth North, please join me in thanking our guests. And just a quick reminder of our 2 upcoming events. First, Transportation and Tariffs at the Port next Thursday, and a visit to the Riverboat Discovery to celebrate their 75th anniversary in July. Thank you.